You know, the best thing about being the moderator is you always know where to sit. It's the place where you're not on anyone else's lap. That's a
good rule.
It's a good rule. So water often seems like the ultimate zero-sum issue, where you have industrial users, agricultural users, municipal users, all fighting over their share of the resource, and any gain for one is a loss for the other. You all have been part of an experiment that is a very different way of kind of looking at this, to try to build a more collaborative approach in Ventura County in the Fox Canyon Water Market Group. Maybe we could start by just giving the audience a sense of what this is, why it's different than the way groundwater is usually managed, and what was the initial impetus to do so. So Shana and Matt, maybe one of you can start us off, since I think you were present at the creation.
All right, yeah, so the effort in Ventura County really started as a conversation among growers. So we have a rich agricultural industry in the county, and it was growers in about the second year of the drought confronting really serious cuts to groundwater extraction. Said, what can we do to create flexibility and to support the viability of agriculture while reducing pumping? And so the idea of a cap and trade system was born in those early conversations. And then there was about 18 months of conversations building consensus in the agricultural community. And once the ag community said, we're serious about cuts, we need this flexibility, the flexibility that a market provides by moving groundwater between users, then they took it to the regulator and said, hey, what would you think about an idea like this?
Shana?
So I think it really, it was part of the bigger picture of how to put together the groundwater sustainability plan. There was many committees. This was one committee of 4, and we really had to have major conversations about what were the criteria, what was important to us, like including land use, what kind of infrastructure were we willing to consider or not consider, what were the issues that some of us got imported water from Metropolitan Water District and some of us were not part of that. Could we have public, could all these trades be public? Because we're dealing with private sector and government and working together. And so all of those rules really had to be fleshed out as we were going forward.
And the groundwater sustainability plan that you talked about was in response to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 20. And that basically has required every basin in the state to develop a plan by 2020 for the high risk and 2022 for the others. Would this effort have happened without that law? Was there an intrinsic local, John? Was there like a local need that would have developed anyway, or was that the prompt?
Well, I mean, that certainly sent a powerful signal, but in Ventura County, in these basins, in the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, we've been managing those basins for the last, since the 80s. So we had a structure in place already and a long history of attempting at least to achieve sustainable use of those basins. So, there was already the built-in familiarity with the notion that you should manage groundwater sustainability. We had an institution already on the ground, and a long history in the ag community, at least in Ventura County, of collaborative approaches to problem solving, as opposed to, like you said, viewing everything as a zero-sum game. So, we already knew we had issues with the basins before SGMA came along, but it certainly goosed the process.
Sarah, can you give us a sense of how both the process and the atmosphere in Ventura differs from the way you see elsewhere, other places kind of dealing with their groundwater?
Well, we at the Nature Conservancy have been present in Ventura County for over 15 years. And one of the things that really drew us to participate in this market was the fact that they were already managing their groundwater. And so one of the biggest hurdles we have with SGMA is that it has been the wild, wild west with groundwater, and there are not a lot of agencies managing it. And so for us, it was a huge step forward that the GMA already exists, and that was out of the way. And so we could come in and really focus on not how do you set up the governance structure, but how do you actually manage a resource. So,
Matt, when did the market, come in? When did it launch?
To tie this to your question about SGMA, just to back up one step, there was broad consensus among growers. We took it to the regulator, and what SGMA did is, first of all, it said, look, the cuts are really coming. So farmers were waking up to that, and it provided that last little nudge. And SGMA also mandated a multi-party stakeholder process. And so that's when the regulator said, you need to include cities, you need to include environmental water users, and you need a plan that has broad consensus among all three user groups. And so that effort began in January of 2016 when Fox Canyon created the Water Market Group, which I had the privilege of chairing. And there was a 7-month-long stakeholder process where those usually disparate stakeholder groups worked together, figured out where there was common ground and where they could compromise, where they couldn't. And then in November of 2016, that group actually unanimously approved a set of recommendations to give to the regulator. And one of those was a water market pilot. Start simple, have a modest market originally just with agricultural water users, and learn as you go, create an adaptive process that lets you learn and adjust. And so that water market pilot began at the very beginning of this year.
And John, what have you learned in the pilot stage?
Launching a water market pilot during the most torrential series of storms in recent memory makes it problematic. So we had plenty of potential sellers and no buyers because water was falling for free from the sky for week after week. I think Matthew's more intimately involved in the management of the market exchange itself because Cal Lutheran has taken that on. But I think we learned something about the necessity of appropriate incentives. If you set up a market and to participate in the market, you have to do things more onerous than your colleagues who aren't in the market. That's a problem. So you have to get the incentives right. We're really hoping that going forward, and Sarah can talk about this, Nature Conservancy's got a large grant, federal grant, so we can establish the infrastructure we need. If you're going to trade a commodity, you need to measure it accurately.
I was going to say, I just want to go back to that very elemental point. Before this project, did most farmers in Ventura, do you know how much groundwater people were using? Did they know how much groundwater they were using?
Yes, they do.
They did.
Yeah,
Yes.
We're a very different place in other parts of the state. We already have meters on all the wells.
But the meters are kind of self-monitored, correct?
Yes.
Self-reported.
Self-reporting, and that was with another committee that was talking about allocations. That really became the crux of the issue. Well, how accurate is our information if now that we're actually getting allocations based on our historical usage that we measured, and that's really stymied some of those discussions.
And am I correct that improving the measurement is part of the second phase of the project?
And actually part of the first phase.
Part of the first phase. Talk about how. Well, actually, before you explain the way you've improved measurement, even the level of measurement that you have in Ventura, how does that compare to other parts of the state? In most places, people do not know, or regulators do not know.
Well, there was an agricultural publication that I get. There was a story about a hearing at a town up in the Central Valley attended by growers where they had a vociferous debate during that about whether metering water use even made sense in the context of SGMA. I don't know how you manage something you're not measuring, but that's the different mindset up there. It's very
So
different.
most places, most basins, they're not even measuring the use.
Right.
And is that going to be plausible under SGMA? How can you develop a plan, right? I mean, are they going to have to start? Is that the first step?
Yeah, I think we see that as one of the most essential steps, and we wrote a grant that really started with, okay, how do we get everything up and metered? And when we say meter, we mean real-time data that's not self-reported, and that is very foundational infrastructure for running a market so that we can actually manage what we measure.
So you have a, $1.9 million grant from the USDA?
Yep, we do.
And what will that fund? What will you be doing with that?
So over $1 million of that is for Fox Canyon. We also have another project in the Central Valley that's included in that grant. But first we are going to try to meter almost 700 wells in the area with the goal of having them included in the market. And then Matthew referred to the first round pilot. We have multiple rounds of basically incrementally growing the market. So you start small. You try to understand, okay, what sort of infrastructure do we need in place? Let's try to get some of the bugs out. Let's get the staff comfortable with doing this. And then you expand it and say, all right, let's get more growers in.
And with the wells, are these going to be self-monitored?
No.
No, right? This is a big change.
Right.
Talk about how are you going to monitor the wells now?
So this is AMI, which is basically real-time data that's streaming into a data portal. And so that's very different than self-monitoring. I think Matthew can probably
Yeah,
provide.
and to talk about, again, the power of what's happening in Ventura County, John used the word incentives, which are, magic words to an economist. But the power of market incentives are that you had an environment where growers were self-monitoring, self-reporting extraction, and when they said, we want to do a water market, and the regulator said, yeah, we can really give this a look, the growers woke up and said, wait a minute, if I'm going to be trading an asset, I need to make sure that no one's cheating, because if they're cheating, they're devaluing my asset. And it was the growers that originally proposed universal advanced metering. Advanced metering, in this case, it's a cellular application. This is a technology that attaches to the meter and then actually reads.
Solar powered?
Solar powered, yeah, reads and broadcasts groundwater pumping data in real time. And so the growers proposed universal AMI. And the initial rollout was in phase 1 of the water market. So one of the big accomplishments of phase 1 is we actually installed AMI. We worked with an amazing corporate partner, Ranch Systems LLC. We built a centralized data hub where all of that data is aggregated. And then the water market exchange administrator, the regulator, and the growers have access to different levels of data.
Sarah, is there anything like that elsewhere in the state, or will this be the most detailed data?
No, this is the first.
This is the first.
Yeah, and I think that was a real reason why we won this grant. It was seen as, okay, you have the regulatory infrastructure in place to sort of force groundwater management, and now we had a vision for how do we actually measure this so we can manage.
Shana, to what extent do you believe this is a model for other? I mean, there are some unique features of Ventura in that you've had more of a tail, you've had more of a 20 years of, but is this, as we said, every basin is going to have to develop a plan under Sigma. Is this do you see this being adopted beyond or widely in the state?
So I always say Ventura is a microcosm of the macro politics of California, and it's very unique in that. So because the county we're sitting in right now, it would not necessarily work. It's a whole different structure. Most of the customers are much more homogeneous and are run from water sources very differently. The market here really allows try to make an even playing field and give everyone an identity or give a value to what that water is so that everyone can talk in the same language. And so I think that's why Ventura is unique for that. The city that I was the general manager for is not connected to imported water, takes water from 3 different groundwater basins. The Ventura River is looking heavily into potable reuse. And really, quite frankly, went to potable reuse because when they were doing the recycling marketing and we had to get out of putting tertiary water into the estuary, we couldn't make it work with what ag was willing to pay for water. So if you're going to put this high level of technology into treating water, then you're going to want to get the return on it. So that's why we went forward making it potable. But then that's really the value of this, is really giving it the same value to everyone and making those exchanges.
The first stage has been solely agricultural users, correct? So you mentioned to expand in the second phase, how will the municipal users or industrial users be integrated into it, if at all?
I think we're looking at that, and the goal was to start with agricultural users, particularly because this effort was really born out of growers, see what happens, and then start to make some recommendations for, if you were to grow the market, how do you have environmental users? We are an environmental user. We're also a landowner and a grower. How do you have urban users to really try to make the market more robust? Because as Shana mentioned, the urban users have supply to contribute, and that might help alleviate some of the problems through groundwater recharge.
The urban users are, in effect, a net exporter? I mean, I'm trying to figure out
The
conceptually.
urban users are the only ones who are doing the R&D to create new water.
New water.
And so, and it's not new water because it's all the same water in the beginning of the dinosaurs, but creating water that can be used. And so when you do that, especially with reuse, it's a constant flow. You can't turn it off. So you need a place to be able to put it into the ground and know that another extractor is not going to take your resource that you put in the ground. And so you need that balance. You need to know that people are being watched and that they're agreeing to the same rules.
John, from the point of view of agriculture, what would be issues in bringing urban users into the system?
Well, there's always, this was some resistance we had to overcome initially in the grower community as well. There's this notion, oh my God, they've got tons of money, they're going to buy up all the groundwater in the market. It's like, it can't actually happen that way because everybody can sell no more than their allocation. But, I think Shana hit on something that's really important. We're looking at some fairly draconian reductions in groundwater use, judging by what the modeling is telling us in some of our really critical basins. Groundwater accounts for 85% of the irrigation water for agriculture in Ventura County. We're almost exclusively dependent on it. And one way you can reach sustainability is through cutting demand. Another way you can reach it is by augmenting supply. And so, we're looking at projects like Ventura's, Oxnard's got one, some other smaller regional desalters are in the works. Making that pie bigger means everybody gets a slightly bigger share. Otherwise, we're looking at potentially like 40% reductions in groundwater.
But in addition to making it bigger, man, is part of the vision of the market that you will be incentivizing growers to be more efficient because then they can, is it?
Absolutely.
And talk about that and whether it's, what it would take for that to happen. In other words, what level of incentive do you need?
So some of the technological innovations that growers are implementing, John can speak to this even more. He can think of a dozen other examples. Strawberry growers are using micro sprinklers. They're using much less water in the initial bed down phase. Raspberry growers, they're actually growing in coconut bark substrate, in pots that sit on the ground, not in the ground. And they can reduce groundwater use by 25% just by switching to substrate. And so the idea with the water market is to create incentives so there's a real economic return on those conservation efforts. They can monetize that. And if they're able to save water, actually offer that in the market to other users.
Right. Sarah, how does that, do you see that being I guess what I'm wondering is the magnitude of that lever. Is the economic incentive enough to actually change behavior in any large-scale way?
Yeah, absolutely.
You do.
I think that's why we were so excited about joining the market. As an environmental user, we are interested in basically retiring water for nature. And so we are very much interested in incentives that are going to reduce consumptive use. So use by urban users, use by agricultural users, so that we can put some to nature.
I want to bring in the audience in a minute, but I want to, as we said, every basin in the state has to develop a plan.
Just about.
If they're not, just about right, if they're not doing this, what are some of the other models that are emerging?
Well, it seems that SGMA, is a meaningful regulatory hammer. They have to cut groundwater extraction. And so the question is, will you just be asking water users to live with those reduced allocations, or are you going to give them flexibility to actually move water between users and flexibility to actually create an economic incentive, economic return on conservation?
This is fundamentally then, as you describe it, it is cap and trade for water, yes?
Basically. Yeah.
And are there any lessons from the cap and trade, for carbon that you see of possible pitfalls or
don't over allocate.
Yeah, don't over allocate, right? Well, you've had a version of that in terms of the part that you didn't control in terms of too much water. I mean, you need a certain amount of scarcity to make the market work.
Yeah, and I think Matthew's point of the cap matters. I think we've seen other cap and trade, other groundwater markets that have failed because the cap's too high or the cap gets raised when it gets painful. And I think if you look at ARB, what they've done with California's carbon market, they spent a lot of time very thoughtfully designing their market based on how others have failed.
Real quick before I bring the others, who sets the cap in this? Who sets the cap?
Well,
Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency.
And but responding to SGMA, which is what? So does the state give you? Has the state given you a glide path of what you're? No.
Yeah. So the genius or infernal characteristic of SGMA, depending on your perspective, is it delegates all responsibility for this to the local entities. The state only steps in if they screw it up. So,
but does the state tell the local entity what is your total allocation?
No. They just set the rules that you have to operate under as you develop your sustainability plan. It's going to be based on locally generated data, local analysis, and all that.
Well, but the definition is sustainable yield, and there's a definition of what sustainable yield is, and you have to get there by 2040. And so if you don't get there by 2040, with whatever great plans you came up with, then the state steps in.
Then they step in. All right, let's step in the audience here. Do we have any? We have a question over there, yes.
So, sorry. Erin Tannenbaum with the Southern California Leadership Network, and have worked with Matthew and John both before, so thank you both for coming to speak to our fellows. And I might have missed this. So with cap and trade, there's a component, obviously, that money goes to under-resourced, low-income areas to address air pollution. Is there a component in this with water or funding that goes to areas that don't have clean drinking water, that don't have water?
You're talking about the presence of disadvantaged communities in Ventura?
Sure. So, the urban areas have definitely have to address with our rates and everything else of how to provide affordable water, and so Ventura is that, and we do have some disadvantaged areas inside the city of Ventura, but the rates have been kept at a very reasonable place. Interestingly enough, though, I mean, throughout Ventura County, there are a lot of people who have de minimis wells, who run their own wells and are very proud of that. Don't really want to get on to a system and feel like they've got their, and so Sigma has been a challenge for those people because even though they're not really covered in Sigma, they start seeing structure over this groundwater basin that they've been able to take from. And quite frankly, a de minimis well is given more water than what we give in development in the city of Ventura for a new house. So that's part of how that's being handled. But
can I ask a final question, and maybe start with Sarah, and anybody else can chime in real quick? How will you define success? Will success be just more people participating in the market? Will it be the price of water going up? Will it be usage going down? What will define success in the implementation of this grant?
I think for us, success will be the first groundwater market that's been designed that benefits nature, agriculture, and urban users.
And what's the metric of that, though? What is the metric of that?
It's functioning. It's up and running. There are trades. Environmental users can buy it. We can sell it. You're seeing more efficiency with agricultural producers. You're seeing investments in groundwater recharge on the behalf of urban users.
Matt?
Well, and I want to call out the success we've already enjoyed because it's worth taking stock of. You're sitting here with someone representing the ag industry, environmental water users, and municipal water users. And so in some sense...
And nothing's been thrown.
We got that out of
you should read his newsletters, though.
but the point is, we already have created an environment, again, through market incentives, where you actually have all three stakeholder groups working together on a collaborative solution. And that's amazing already.
For me, success is, 20 years from now, we haven't had to fallow 40% of the most fertile agricultural land in the country.
Yeah, and what will get you there? Does that mean that there's going to be less usage? I mean, ultimately?
There ultimately will be, but that'll be done through a system that's flexible and fair and allows maximum, accords maximum power to the users.
20 years, we'll come back, we'll do it again.
All right.
Listen, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to this terrific panel.